Hey, do you teach yoga? Have you ever trained to lead yoga classes, to be a yoga therapist? Have you ever owned a yoga studio? Maybe even just wondered what it was like for the women and men up there in front of the room on their mats, leading you through endless Surya Namaskars, down dogs, and pranayamas galore? Well, these are their stories, and mine. I'm Rebecca Sebastian, a 20-year yoga teacher, 10-year yoga therapist, yoga studio owner, and co-founder of a yoga-focused nonprofit. I've done a lot in the yoga world over the last 20 years, pretty much everything except had a water cooler. You know, a place to share stories, talk about struggles, successes, and find other people who do the same thing that I do. Welcome to Working in Yoga, a podcast and substitute water cooler for yoga folks to connect and build community, to share our unique profession, our challenges, and our journeys with the world.
Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Recently, I have been thinking about all the different ways that we use yoga as our work. I often think our perception is that we are a monoculture of a profession, with everyone taking the same path, having similar goals and desired outcomes, and visions for our future. But this couldn't be further from the truth. I've run across so many different ways that people use yoga as their work, but today's guest, Gloria Hester, might be the most interesting story that I've heard yet. Before we begin our chat, though, let's catch up for a second. First, if you haven't already, would you like, follow, or subscribe to the podcast from wherever you're listening? I just ran composite numbers across all platforms recently and realized there are truly thousands of us streaming across all platforms from all sorts of places all across the world. And those humans follow and subscribe to this podcast. And that was so astounding for me to see. I cannot express how grateful I am. So thank you ever so much for sharing our water cooler space with me. I'm honored that so many of you want to connect. And don't forget about the back room, the self-led co-creation space for you to take all that you're thinking about from the podcast and put it into practice in your business. Head to the show notes for all the details. And finally, do you want your photos to be featured in Inside Yoga magazine? One of the things we're working on is a documentary project showcasing photos of our spaces, the before and after of our classes, and showcasing the amazing ways that we work. So also find submission guidelines for photos in the show notes as well. Now, let's get into it with Gloria Hester. Hey friends, welcome to Working in Yoga. Okay, so my friend Gloria and I just had a really lovely conversation before we hit record, and I'm like, we gotta start talking off on the mic. So let me introduce to you Gloria Hester. Gloria, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
I would be happy to. Hi, I'm Gloria Hester. I am from the southeast of the U.S. originally, and I have the accent that stays with me no matter where I go. So I'll do my best to not to be understandable. Sometimes my vowels get drawn out a little bit. But let's see. I grew up on a farm, loved horses, loved dogs, pretty much all animals, and stayed in nature a lot. And I think that served me quite well because as an adult, I found yoga. And I came to yoga through the lens of yoga as a healing art. And so that's what brought me to yoga. And so I had some injuries that I needed to heal. They were not horse related injuries, but they were injuries. And so that's really what led me. And immediately, the very first practice I ever did, I just fell in love with it. And I just felt at home in my body, which was really a new concept about I could feel that no one had to use the words or tell me that. I felt it. I experienced it. It was a lived experience. So then the next thing I know, I'm finding, okay, I started to study a lot of different disciplines of yoga. And that just led me to some astounding teachers. I also had grown up with the influence of prayer and faith from my great-grandfather. So I was always asking for guidance. And then I was also open to the guidance. And that's one part I think that sometimes we're not always open to the guidance, not in a blaming way, but in a I bring that up not to in a judgmental way, only to say that sometimes we ask, but we don't realize we're getting the guidance, and we are. So we have to be open to it too. Like we have to ask, or we don't have to ask, but if we do, then we could also be open to it. So I would receive very clear guidance, and I was so grateful for that. And that led me to start traveling coast to coast to study, to teach yoga. And so grateful for all of my teachers and mentors. And very quickly, it led me into learning about, well, serendipity led me to learn about Thomas Hanna's work, which was the first formal somatic field that I studied. And I went on because I'm a very curious person. I'm an avid student of life, you know. So, and not all of my influences have to fit a certain box. And I think that's one of the things we can go into today.
Yeah.
That one of my very first yoga therapy students before I knew of Thomas Hanna's work, it was my dog named Nikki, who was 17. And what I was learning in restorative therapeutics, I started to be curious because out of necessity to help her. I loved her. I found her as a stray pup. And so we'd had a long marvelous 17 years. She was just pure love. So I just wanted to give to her and help her any way I could. And so I would ask my veterinarian questions as I would have ideas. And thank God, my veterinarian back in that time was studying quantum physics. And so oftentimes she would say to me, no, you're not crazy. Keep going. What you're telling me is quantum physics. So I thank God I had these different influences because I was absolutely outside of the known box in
Yeah.
that I was any boxes I knew of. I was outside of those. So it just led to a lot. I would watch Nick for her feedback, and that would fine hone that. And then by the time I started formally studying, the first formal work for horses was through Eleanor Criswell Hanna, who had been married to Thomas. When Thomas was alive, he didn't think animals had enough of a frontal cortex to be able to do this work. He developed it for humans. And so I want to say a little bit about that. It's very neuroscience based, which was actually really great for me. It helps me keep a leg in both worlds, so to speak. But then I realized actually I'm not in both worlds, I'm in my own world. So because if you have like say if you have a leg in this boat and a leg in this boat, whoop, that's not very stable. You're
Yeah.
gonna be a
Yeah.
problem. So I realized I was like, oh, actually, I am in my own process, in my own embodiment between all the species. So you know, I I don't know the exact count. I've probably worked with maybe 6 or 7 species somatically and distance work as well. So I just keep moving forward, learning, observing, allowing animals to give me feedback, allowing people to give me feedback. Hopefully, I'm always open to what they're showing me as well. And also just um, fine honing my skills in ways that I can. Um, I love Carolyn Mace. She talked about one time about intuition. She says that intuition is something you come here with, and it's also a skill you can learn. So she said it's both. It's just how much of each one. Some people have
Yeah.
never, yeah, and I never set out to try to study anything to do with intuition at all in any
I
way.
think one of the things that's really interesting about your work, and so as I was telling you before we hit record, this is going to bucket into a series of, I want to highlight the different ways in which we work because I think we've sort of built these bespoke careers and they're sort of based on our own personal like drive or interest or things that have come up in front of us. And I'm going to speak for myself, but I feel like this is often how it works is that a group of humans just kind of show up in front of you, or in your case, a group of animals show up in front
Yes.
of you, and you're like, oh, I think I have something to say, or I think I have something to offer in this way. And so the more I look around, the more I'm like, there's no two of us that are alike that are doing this work. We have all these different interests. And the minute you were just like, I also work with animals, I was like, you have to tell me everything.
Yes.
so
Yeah.
so you started working with animals. Like, how does word get out that you're working with animals in the like therapeutic yoga lens?
Yeah. It was definitely word of mouth. I would say that. Also, there's the known and then the unknown, the seen and the unseen. And I think in my case, there may have been a lot happening in the unseen. Well, only for the fact that I would get invited to go to a foreign country, and I would think, okay, well, I knew that my heart was for the horses, because I
Yep.
have such a lineage and background with them that I know a lot about that and where I would want to meet them and this kind of thing. So I would be in this country and I would find out, oh, okay, there aren't really at that time like internet or phones and all this kind of stuff that we take for granted, the infrastructure wasn't really there that we'd have. You'd have to find a way into a town and find a way into a cafe that might have it. And I didn't know anyone. And so I was like, well, how will I bring this to the horses in this country? It was my vision and I've been invited and I was there. But that part remained to be seen. And so a friend of mine invited me to go with her to, it was like a homeowners association in that country.
Mm.
It was a pretty afternoon. I was like, okay, I'll go. I didn't have a home there, but I just went, she invited and I went. And so as the gentleman starts to talk, a woman sitting behind me, she quietly leans forward and taps me on the shoulder. And she says, what do you do? And I said, well, I do this work with horses. It's kind of like yoga for horses. And she said, oh, she said, I'm the community. I put out all the blog for the whole community. I will let everyone know you're here. I know all the horse people.
Oh,
That
lovely.
so I'd never seen her, but she
Yeah.
indeed put out the word, and I still am connected with some horsewomen in that country and met lovely horses there. And then I went, very similar thing happened. I would want to go to a certain city for yoga, for example. And then I would be standing in the studio waiting on class to start. And someone behind me would tap me on the shoulder and say, what do you do? And I'd say, well, I do this work with horses, and it's called Yogic Wisdom for Horse and Human. And she would say, oh, my daughter rides. She has a trainer. Can you go tomorrow with me? I'll introduce you to her trainer. So then I would be doing demonstrations and lectures and teaching for that trainer had several pre-vet students who were horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it was just that would happen everywhere I would go, some tap on the shoulder. And that's what I mean about the seen or the unseen would cause a person I don't know if they knew why they were asking me or not. I never asked them, but they would, what do you do? And that would happen oftentimes even at horse clinics. I would feel led to be somewhere and then some person would see me and she would say, what do you do? And even though she didn't understand if I would start to go into some of the deeper things behind it, she would say, well, I think there's someone you need to meet. And still to this day, 15, 20 years later, they're still friends and clients. And, it just, so it was by osmosis. And I think intention is another thing. You probably know that from the influence of yoga, that intention means a lot. And I think that too was part of it. Clarity of intention, not knowing the details of the how at all, just knowing that I was like, this is going to make horses really happy. And that's just was part of that intention.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you like nitty-gritty questions. And they're gonna be clumsy. Like, how the hell did that happen? Like, why do
Yeah.
you look at horses
Yeah.
and say, oh, I have something that I learned about for humans and
Mhm.
then translated it to horses? Like,
Okay.
how, like, I know you're deeply steeped in like the neuroscience behind all of this too. Like, how does that work?
Okay, I'll start with this part first because I think this is really important for anyone who wants to meet their horse this way, work with their own horse this way, work with others' horses this way. When I was a kid, my mom was a horse trainer. She was
Yep.
grew up riding and was very adept. She was what people would I think considered a protege. So, but I can remember maybe I was like 12 and she would be teaching me something. I would be on the horse and she'd say, cue the horse to such and such. And I would say, what if she doesn't want to? Or, and honestly, most trainers, that is very annoying. That's not a question that it needs to be a clear ask and then a clear communication. And then did you get the ask? And if not, what do you need to do to get the ask? That's a
Yeah.
trainer.
Yeah.
But I just wasn't wired that way. I was constantly like, how does this horse feel? That and I would say, what if she doesn't want to? What if she doesn't feel good? And, so it was just
That's adorable. Honestly, I love that.
so I
So
was
cute.
born, literally born. And I later found out I was invited to Norway, and I found out when I was invited. Well, I found out before because a woman from Denmark came to one of my horse retreats, and I was holding retreats for yoga and horses and somatic movement, all the things, right? And all the
Yeah.
yumminess that makes up this world. And so she said, "Do you know what your last name means in our country?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." And she said, "Hester is our word for horses." And so that's what I did. So I had no idea. I don't know how I'd lived that long on the planet and didn't know that. So then when I was invited to Norway, and we're driving down the interstate, and we're behind the horse trailer, and one side of the door says Hester, one side of the door says horses. And it's just such a great
Yeah.
all the signs. So that's another thing I think that's a lot of fun, is to have had all this long mentorship with Eleanor, which Eleanor is who I took the principles of somatics for humans and adapted that work for horses. She mapped out, she would have her equine somatic, equine anatomy book, and, map out, well, how can we ask the prime mover muscles, the same. And so Dennis Reese, with a natural horseman, is who kept asking Eleanor, because they had helped him so much with his own body. He had a lot of injuries from rodeo and horsemanship and things. So
Sure.
the principles hold true with any animal with a vertebrae. And so I was already
That's
working with Nikki with yoga
that's
therapy.
a wild sentence. Keep going, but that's like
Okay.
such a good. I'm just like that is
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So when I the serendipitous loops of how I was brought into Eleanor's world, and how Eleanor was brought into my world, and how I brought her into my world and organized trainings for that work. And then when Eleanor would always say to me, she would say, "The work that you're developing." From the first time, I didn't know what she meant by that. I had not a clue. I would ask, I didn't know what she meant, but she would always say, "The work that you're developing." And then over time, sure enough, as I started to work non-locally with animals, which is not part of somatics, working non-locally with cats
Right.
and other
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or pot-bellied pigs or orphan calves, or that's no, that is not. So what would happen was I would have that awareness, um, and I had had it happen enough that I had to trust it. And I wasn't seeking that. I didn't set out to try to learn any of that. That was just part of perhaps genetics. I don't really know. I have no idea.
Sure.
And it could, I don't know. I could give that some thought if it's relevant, but I don't think at this point, I don't think it's relevant. I don't think we can
Yeah.
separate anything.
Yeah.
So yes, the principles are true for any animal with a spine, any vertebrate animal. And so the place is, I feel like the place in the place that interests me most is how do you, oh, and a wolf. I've had a private client as a wolf for many years that
Yeah.
transitioned this last year, but she was always so lovely to work with. And so each species, they're going to have their own things that we need to be cognizant of to some degree, in just our own movements, the way we position our bodies, um, our breathing, our cognizance of our own being. We don't have to try to change it. We just have to, I think awareness is key.
Okay. So, like, so you said you had a private client that was a wolf. Are you then like, I mean, because this is what we do for humans too. Are you just like Googling like anatomy for a wolf
That's
so
really
that you
funny.
have
Okay, that's
some
such
kind
a
of
great question.
understanding of how their anatomy and physiology for
Okay.
each animal species
Yeah.
works?
This is actually how Seva was born, what you're touching on. Thank you for asking that question. The answer to that can be yes, for the fact that the person who's the steward of that animal, some people would call that person's owner, or you could say that, I mean,
Yeah.
that animal's owner, or that animal's guardian, or that animal's steward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes that would be the case, because I would want to convey a particular principle or an idea to the person who is working with that animal. So I always see it as more, sometimes they may want me to, I may focus on the animal. There are other times it's more of a team effort, because I love for people to be able to be with their animals in ways they didn't know were possible. And because they're the ones who are with their animal all the time. So as much as they want to be part of that, I'm constantly texting them ideas, images, shapes, movements, postures, and that's really how I've developed something called SEVA, and it's an acronym, and you will love that being from the field of yoga, right? It's a Sanskrit word for those who are listening who might not know that. But SEVA, the acronym is Somatic Education for Vertebrate Animals, because I had yogic wisdom for horse and human, but it didn't let people know who we can work with tigers, other species. So SEVA just was really by necessity, and several of my students who've known the horse work for a long time and also the human work, they really pulled that out of me. And when I would hold trainings that were more like what we might think of as more like a yoga teacher training, which was my background, that that term really wasn't appropriate, and we really didn't know what to call it, because I would be teaching people who were massage therapists, but I would bring them to the barn to meet a certain horse, to meet a student's horse or a client's horse, and we could show in real time. We could say, okay, this horse is off the track, maybe thoroughbred who used to run races.
Yeah.
His neck is very contracted, and working with the principles. And also it helps anyone who works in any field develop their sensory system, develop their touch. So most of my retreats, and whether it was a retreat or a training or both, or just a workshop or get together, it was always through the lens of sometimes social workers would come, or acupuncturists, they knew
Yeah.
something here they wanted to learn. And so it's always been, and we've had a lot of laughs. I had a woman come from another country and she brought a Doberman because she didn't have anywhere to take the Doberman, and it was a horse retreat. So she is there for an in-residence retreat with this Doberman who had just lost his family. So she was and I was like, yes. So we had a yoga mat for the Doberman, and it was a wonderful, thank God, everyone who comes, they're usually animal lovers. And so it was just very welcoming for this dog who needed a place to be, even though that wasn't planned. So it seems like every time there's something like that that is very unique and special. And um, but but yeah, you can know the principles, but being able to work with each particular species, there can be things that you might want to take into account that for one species that you wouldn't have to for another.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, okay, I have 10,000 questions.
and I
Like
may not have
partially,
even answered your last question. So
no, it was great. Actually, you totally did answer that question. And part of what is going through my brain right now is that the yoga space has a really troubled relationship with animals, right? Like like we really truly do. I mean, there's, things like goat yoga and puppy yoga and all these other things, but it's like, okay, so not to get on a high
no,
horse about
no,
it, because
no,
if
this is,
you
I see, yeah, I see
but
where.
like it's also sort of like the exploitation of animals in order to create novelty in a yoga class. And that is so different from what you're describing, which is true love and respect for the animals, which is like truly loving and respecting the humans. And those two,
Yeah.
like, I just really want to make sure that we highlight that,
Thank
like,
you,
you
Becca.
having a Doberman on the mat is not the same as puppy yoga. You
It
know
is
what I mean?
not. It is not. And I'm aware, like, like classical hatha yoga, your purpose is the point of classical yoga is you're able to draw your senses inward so that you can. So then if you have a goat on your shoulders, it's a little hard.
Yes.
So you can see the dichotomy. Having said that, maybe like bringing people together for community, for fun, and like you're saying, the novelty, and it's very different from where I was coming from and the lens of what this.
Yes.
And for probably 15 years, oftentimes, that's one thing we all, when we first hear information of any kind, it comes through our own lens. No matter how open we are, it comes through our own filter. And because our brain is trying to attach it to what it already knows, to connect some
Yep.
dots. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, it can cause things to take longer than they have to otherwise. So oftentimes people would have heard of equine assisted somatic therapy, psychotherapy for humans, and they would automatically they would hear horses, yoga, somatic, and they would put me in the bucket of, oh, I bring people in to help people, that I would use a horse to help humans. And I'm like, no,
Yes.
No, it is the exact opposite of that. I'm bringing people in to work with the horses somatically. It's on the behalf of the horse. If
Yeah.
I'm teaching the human somatic movement or any form of yoga or awareness, let's say mindful movement, because any movement done intelligently and mindfully is useful. So if we just leave out those descriptive words for a moment, I think that's very, very important. I've had clients who they were so sympathetic dominant in their nervous system, we would work with standing practices that are not in any of those fields, but they would mimic the movements in a way that her nervous system, she could actually do the practice, but to lie on the floor was out of the question for her. And so that's fine. So if we just take out all the descriptive words, that I think it can be helpful. So going back to that, yes. So if I were to invite a group to come together, I would lead them through their own mindful movement practices, whatever I felt like was best for that group on that day in that space.
Yeah.
And they then had some concept, at least some form of concept about, okay, when we go to be with the horses, okay, now this is about the horse's own inner experience. How can
Yes.
I help facilitate that? And that's why we ended up naming the program a facilitator training. The first was a 9-month program, and we called it a facilitator training. It is when
Yeah.
Seva was born, but it's a way to say, all right, we're going to facilitate in whatever ways, because each person truly, one person might be really good at doing that visually. Animals see what we see, animals see in pictures. And so they can see, if they're good at conveying a message through visualization, wonderful. Someone
Yeah.
else, that's nowhere on their radar. And I can say, okay, can you ask the horse to make a particular movement or ask the dog to make a particular movement and watch that animal, that dog or that horse for their own feedback, because that's very important about what we'll do next. So it's working with, not on. And it's also because of my background, sometimes I would know, I would get called to work with a horse, and the owner had known me for years because she'd been a student of mine or a student slash client. And so I would know she would have a preconceived notion in her head of how we were going to work with her horse. And I would just let her know ahead of time, we're not going to work like that today. It's going to be really different. I would know because I
Yeah.
could feel the horse from a 2.5 hour drive away, and I could already see what we needed to do.
Yeah.
And it's hard to argue with the results. That's why I had to stop fighting that, because it would be very obvious to me, it would be very clear to me. I didn't have another option because I wasn't going to override that. And
Yeah.
then to see the horse through, I'll give you an example. There was a horse, I couldn't work with that horse because he had a very dominant pasture mate. He had been injured, probably by her. The owner didn't know, but she didn't know at this point what else to do. Veterinarians, this, that, and she said, and she knew me. She said, "Do you think you can work with my horse?" I said, "Absolutely." And so, but the problem was that his herd mate was so dominant, we we couldn't get to him without her hurting him more. So necessity is the mother of invention. So we stand across the field. I can see him, he can see me. The mare's calm. And I just showed him directionally 2 different options of movement that might be comfortable for him across the field. And he began to show me that he understood, and his owner. I think I don't remember what I said to the owner before, his person, but she could see that he was responding in real time across a field. And that's how we worked with him, because we had to, because I couldn't let
Yeah.
this mare injure him more. And so that was a great benefit for him to be able to figure out, how can I move in a way that works well for me right now to get me out of this chronic pain cycle so that I can heal. And that's
Yeah.
really for any of us. Oftentimes we're doing something in our day-to-day lives that are creating a pain, a chronic contraction, a headache, a stomach ache. All the things can be caused by something we're doing that we don't know we're not conscious of it. So we can't stop doing it because we don't know we're doing it.
Yeah.
So part of this.
Okay, so I want to call attention to a skill that I think you have that is somewhat unique to you that other people, because there's a stopping point where I think people can see work that they could potentially be doing intuitively. Like, I think a lot of us have that feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have something to say to this group, whatever it is. And what I think you're very good at is just being Like, I'm going to try it. And I think that that's not always the case for other people. So, can you walk me through how somebody who might be listening to this who's going, I've never thought about taking yoga teaching or yoga therapy into this direction because nobody told me I could?
Yeah,
How, you know what I mean?
I
Like we
do.
do, even though we don't have like an actual profession, we still have sort of a preconceived prescriptive path of what we're supposed to be doing. And you just built whatever called to you. And
Yeah.
that's such a cool skill.
Yeah.
How do we teach that skill to other people who
Okay,
need it?
well, I love that. I would love to be involved in that. That's just a big yes for me. I don't know that I always, I think part of it was out of love for my dog Nick before I
Yeah.
knew about any other ways to across the species with somatic education. In some fields of somatic work in Europe, I have a woman who her entire somatic career was in Europe through university. She wasn't working with animals, however, she's an animal lover. So for 20 or more years, we've had a great camaraderie, and she's helped me fill in some of those gaps, I would say, because she too is an animal lover. And she's
Yeah.
like, I can't do what you're doing, but I love it. And I want it, so she's like, I've tried. And it's really funny that she says, I'm like, yes, you can. I don't know why she thinks she can't. She can. It just, I don't, we'll have to say why that she thinks that. But, so with Nikki, I was working with a principal that I didn't have a name for it yet. And the name I think probably comes from another somatic field that originated in Europe, but, um, it was so through studying therapeutic yoga and supporting one's body
Mhm.
therapeutically, that is really what got my attention first for Nikki. And then I would use my hands to say, all right, is this more comfortable for her or is this more comfortable for her? And then I would
Yeah.
say, okay, can I use a beach towel to mimic that? And is that comfortable for her? And so because of her age, I didn't want her to have a lot of things that could have brought on a lot of other problems. And my vet knew that. I knew that. I just made my vet promise that if I was being delusional in any way, that she would tell me. And if I was not seeing things I needed to see,
Yeah.
that she would
Yeah.
see them and say them. I was like, all right,
Yeah.
this is where I need you to make sure you watch me. And it was great. And so that was a training ground for me. And it was very close to my heart. So I think that was upping. I've had some conversations with friends that work in the field, and I want to say this for people who are listening, an entire half of our brain is dedicated into knowing, and you don't know why you know, but you just know. Half of our being is built for that. Having said that, it has also been filtered out of society and filtered out of what's seen as, I won't go there. We won't go there.
Yeah.
We have a
Yeah.
lot of with that. I'll just say that, and it's like saying, if you have two arms and you have two legs, but you say, well, my left leg's better, so I'm just going to cut the right leg off to make all of humanity. I'm going to appease
Yeah.
humanity. That's what we've done.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what we've done. And so, it's unfortunate and has created a lot of suffering on this planet. And so I think that's another part of me is I'm just like, well, you know, let's not do we have to continue doing that? Let's not. Can't we do this a different way?
Yeah.
So that is where, taking a stand for the and. It's like, yeah, you have a left leg
Yeah.
and it's awesome. And you have a freaking fantastic right leg and it's awesome as well. Let's use them all the ones we
Yeah.
have. And same with our arms and our hands. So um when we've there we can't separate the culture we were born into and what we were taught and the not just our time span on planet Earth, but our ancestral time span on planet Earth. We can't separate any of that. All we can do is have awareness and, I mean, move forward, and
Yeah.
also ideally, keep ourselves safe because that is important. I think, like that term meta loving kindness, what I realize about meta, which I am a big fan of that, METTA, not the
Yeah.
social media, which is META, but the other, the original meta, loving kindness meta. I'm a big fan of that. And I realize if we're going to practice meta and if we're going to have any form of meta, we also have to have that for ourselves. So we can't want someone else to be a martyr if we're not willing to be a martyr. We can't martyr ourselves and think that's okay either, which I have come really close to doing numerous times on behalf of this work and continue to
Yeah.
do so.
Yeah.
I have.
I mean, I think that one thing that this story gives people permission to do, because I've certainly found this in my work, is that sometimes the place you want to go, because there's like a common conversation in the business side of the yoga space of like finding your niche, like finding the thing that you're supposed to do, right? And you're supposed to know. And my joke has always been like sometimes you just trip over it. Like sometimes you're just like, and sometimes you trip over it and you do that for a little bit and then you trip over something else and you're like, okay, so now I'm going to do that for a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is that real active part of our experience as professionals of just being like, well, I'm just going to ride this and see what happens
Uh-huh.
and see what calls to me.
I think that's one thing, when we first started talking about asking for guidance and then being open to receive the guidance. And for different people, that can come in different ways. Some people are naturally, they may receive auditorily. Other people may receive through a sensory feeling, their
Yeah.
answer, they feel it in their bodies, or they may see a vision, or they may have it, those are, some people consider those more esoteric, but they're a very natural part of the human experience. They're very natural. We're wired, our brains are wired to have these different, what people would consider abilities. They've just been trained out of people. And it has, well, I probably shouldn't share these certain studies. Maybe that'll be a different conversation. But um, so I want to think about what is appropriate to share in a way that can serve the listeners so that they can have what they need. And
Yeah.
ideally, that also the animals can have what they need. Because,
Mhm.
you know, um, I want to share this with you because I think you'll appreciate this story. Decades ago, I went to try to learn from people who could help me develop the business end of what seemed such a out of the box thing, or yogic wisdom
Yeah.
and human working with
Yeah.
animals. So yeah, so a group, they kept, and there were about 350 people in this room. It was a very large room. And I loved animals a lot because it was also a very cold room, and I don't like cold. And so it's very large and it's very cold. It's like, it's not my jam, it's in the middle of a city. It's not my vibe, but I'm there and I'm fully participating. And so they kept asking me, they said, well, your ideal client is online, because we live in the land of Google. And if you want to
Yeah.
find something or learn something, you go to the internet and you search. And so they said, Gloria, horses aren't online. You can't, the horses are not online. And,
Yeah.
that they're not wrong about that. They're like, horses are not, they don't know how to search. And so, but anytime they would ask the question, they would say, who is your ideal client? And that's
Yeah.
where yoga teachers have been told to niche, right?
Yep.
So, because we could talk a little bit too about the history of yoga and the lineage of yoga and how different cultures understood yoga. And I think that would be helpful because when you're in the States, we don't have the culture for how it would traditionally occur, how reciprocity would occur, how
Yeah.
all of these things that have to happen. If you're in a physical body, you need clothes, you need a car, you need
Food to
all the
eat.
food
Yeah.
to eat. Yeah, you're in a
Yeah.
physical body. You're not in a, yeah. So, but so there I am, I'm doing my best. And when they would ask me the question, who is your ideal client? I would say a bay horse. And for people who don't know horses, the bay horse is like a chocolate brown with a black mane and tail. And, they're just gorgeous. And so I would always say, and I've known many bays that I've loved and grew up with a bay I loved. His name was Mike. And so they would say, who is your ideal client? And I would say, a bay horse. That was the only truth I could find in my body. Nothing else could come out of my mouth, no matter how hard I tried. And I just couldn't. I couldn't fake it. And so during that exercise where I'm like a bay horse and we'd laugh and I'd search deeper and it was still the same. And so during that process, a woman sees me and she goes, "Oh my God, you're the horsewoman. We've been looking for you." She's like, "Don't move." And I mean, she's so excited. She's like, "Don't move. We've been looking for you." So she goes running across that big room and she grabs her roommate and she comes running back across the room. And that woman is so excited. She gets both of my hands and she's jumping up and down. "We found you. We found you. We found you." And I'm thinking, I didn't know. And so I'm kind of jumping up and down with her, but I don't know why. And, just so she's so excited.
I would be too. Yeah.
Yeah, the mirror neurons, right? We're like,
Yeah.
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 And so, but it's more than mirror neurons. It's so much more. But it's a spirit recognizing a spirit, a soul recognizing a soul, and a mission recognizing a mission. And so there we are, and and more. But so there we are, and she's like, "I can't believe it! We found you! I'm so excited!" And she looks right at me and she says, "My horse needs you." And I said, "What's your horse's name?" And she says, "Bay. His name is Bay." So
Of course. Of
all
course.
all these sweet people around me were like, "We can't fight with you anymore. We're
Yeah.
done. We can't argue with this, you know." So,
Yeah.
and I'm glad. I mean, but it wasn't that I wasn't trying. I was trying my hardest, my best, you know. There's
Yeah.
another word that's coming to mind, but I won't say it. But strive, you know. But
Yeah.
but that too, I think lines up serendipity. And I won't say that I grew up being told to trust my intuition at all. I didn't come from that culture. I won't say I was being told not to trust it, but it was just, I don't think it was ever a thing. But things happened in such a way that I would be shown or told or somehow, and then it would immediately, I mean, within seconds, if not 15 minutes, it would be confirmed in a way that I couldn't deny it. So I had to learn. It go back to that thing where it's like, well, go ahead and just cut off your, cut off,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I can't say it's always the case, and I've never tried to make it happen. I haven't tried to make it not happen. I haven't tried to make it happen either. And that's where the beauty, I think, lives in these things. And so for someone who wants if they're in, let's say if you have a background in yoga, in any capacity, and you want to, and you love yoga and you want to share it with others. Um, it- and if you want to teach, because there's all different levels of teaching. You can lead people through movements. You can guide people through movements. You can encourage them not to force or hurt strain. And they're probably going to do it anyway if they're from the States. And probably, I can't speak to,
Fair.
yeah, and probably a lot of other countries would too. But you can do that, and you can also study in capacities where you can develop all of your tools as a teacher, or as a, if you want to use the other term, even yoga therapist, however you want to say it, yoga teacher, yoga therapist, yoga guide, any of that, or in my field, somatic educator. If we take away all that and we just say, how can I, from one nervous system to, uh, if you're working one-on-one, another nervous system or a room of nervous systems, how can I convey something that's going to be incredibly useful for this group today? Or how can I convey something to this person in front of me that will be incredibly useful for them today? That could come through a sentence that you said that's coming through that you don't even know why you say it, but it
Yeah.
means everything to them. It doesn't even have to be about how you engage your quadricep or your, you know,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and I think if for new teachers, I want to invite new teachers to really dive into that, because that is where that is where like I'm thinking about the words magic and also the word music. You know how music can be magical because it can move
Mhm.
us so powerfully. So we can we can if we're open to it. I think it was Marianne Williamson said, like, if you are the faucet, God is the water. Does
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just show up with what you do know. Maybe you have 10 known things, 10 things you think are true that you can teach from. You show up with those, and you show up with an open heart, and you're humble, and there's stuff you don't know. The rest those gaps get filled in. There's always going to be stuff that we don't know, or you can know a lot, and that's great. But I think part of it is like being in the space especially for animals, if you can be in the place, it feels so good because it takes the pressure off. If you're pretending you know everything, that's not useful for working with animals or children. You know how they,
Yeah.
adults have usually been taught like to fake it. And so everybody
Yeah.
kind of agree to whatever that is. But I don't think that's really helpful. Um, uh, Let me think of her name. Martha Beck. So
Oh,
okay,
sure.
okay. Martha Beck shared a story about, there was a study. I don't know who did the study, but they took a group of 5-year-olds And they took a group. So the one group was the 5-year-olds. The other group were highly trained engineers, architects, scientists. And so that was the other team. They gave both teams the same tools to work with. They gave them marshmallows and uncooked spaghetti noodles. They set a timer.
Perfect.
It is so perfect. And they said, okay, team A, team B, or team one, team two, the instructions were to build the tallest structure you can. And we're going to time you. I don't know how much time they gave them to build the tallest structure. Every time without fail, the 5-year-olds could beat the adults.
That does not surprise me one bit.
And I think that's really what I'm getting at here when I'm saying, like, showing up to say, okay, this is what I do know. And then just being okay with what you don't know. Because the 5-year-olds knew, I mean, they're 5. They're just like, they're going to get in there and see what they can make happen. And also, the ones who had an idea, they just try it, But with the hierarchical trained group, you don't do that. You're like, well, this is so and so, and he's
Yep.
this or she's that, and I'm not. So I'm just going to stand back, even though I can probably do a good job. It's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, there's that tension, I think, that we as adult humans, and I think it's a double tension, right? So we're raised in a hierarchical culture, and also we're in a job that people already think is sketchy. So, so like
I never
there's,
knew that part, but you're right about this. It's true.
so I do think that we feel like we have something to prove, like we have to almost
Yeah.
over legitimize what we're doing. Like, not only is here's what I'm doing, but here's like 750,000 reasons why I'm doing it, proved by science that, you know what I mean? And I'm like, what if we just didn't operate that way? What if we decided that that wasn't going to be how it worked for us?
I'm very grateful that you're doing what you're doing, and I think these kinds of conversations will give those who need permission, because again, is there's an entire part of us that if someone who is very intuitive, if we use an example of someone like Carolyn Mace, they've studied her for many decades and they know that her medical intuition is higher than the best medical equipment that this country has. She's outperformed it consistently for decades. Let's say the medical equipment's at 82 or 85, she's at like 98,
Yeah.
consistent. But it's not the competitive part, it's the part where if someone is highly vetted, that's fine, but you don't even, it's not even, let me think how to say this. There's room to be skeptical. I think it's healthy to be skeptical. Having said that, being skeptical because you've already predetermined an answer is not okay.
Ah, there it is. There it is.
Can't keep hiding behind that either. It's old, it's tired, it's cumbersome, it's painful. You know, I had a teacher who said, if something is truly good for you as an individual, by definition, if it's something that feels right in your own heart, you're not being selfish. You know, by definition, it's something that ultimately it would serve another person as well. You know how you may have been conditioned to think, oh, I can't
Yeah.
know, or I must be helpful and all these kinds of things. And it can stop someone else from their own developmental growth if you're out of it's a little bit, sounds a little heavy there to say that, but it could theoretically, if
Yeah.
we're being people pleasers and things like that, and we're not, doing our own work to say yes to this, no to that. So because something you weren't meant to say yes to, if you're not being a people pleaser, then theoretically that can give someone else room to come into that place
Yeah. Yeah.
who is meant to play that role. And that's opening up to the bigger picture more as well. And being able to live our lives this way, I think that's the thing we can't ever really control for, or we haven't been allowed to have ways to control for it. But I would seek out the highest educated people I could find every time and
Yeah.
say, ask for guidance. Do you think I should do this? Do you think I should do that? And they're like, no, stay in the field. We need you doing exactly what you're doing. We do not
Yeah.
need you jumping through hoops for academia. They
Yeah.
literally said that to me, PhDs over large communities, many of them over and over would say, I would seek out people, for that guidance. And um, because I just wanted to, look in field of yoga, you might say be of service or,
Yeah.
and always for me, it was always what was tugging at me was I really wanted the animals to have this work and and be congruent with what I knew to be true, where the labels oftentimes will limit what's possible. I was very aware of that.
Yeah.
Some animals love sound, some animals love mantra, some animals love color. And so I didn't want to limit what's possible for people when they're working with their animals in a way, they have their vet out there all the time, their vet's involved in it, and they're doing everything they can for their animals on every level. And you just want to not hold back, so that they can have what they need. Because I think love is a great love that, I know something like love is what tethers us to each other in a good way, not in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that part where I've seen, like, I've worked with a lot of animals that are way up in age, and when it's time for them to transition, the love is holding, it's pulling, it's tethering, and then you also have to know it's in the animals, it's in the service of the animal that they have their mahi, their great maha, their great
Yeah.
maha,
Yeah.
great maha samadhi, their great exit, into the divine.
Yeah.
That you don't get in the way of that when it's not, if when it's that animal's time or when it's that person's time, you
Mm.
don't get in the way of that. And so I've always been cognizant of that. And because we can teach animals yoga nidra. I mean, we've led horses through yoga nidra. That's why I was like, I don't want to put anything in a box. And
Yeah.
when you said that how is it that is it like in the bigger culture, the field of yoga can be seen as sketchy? Is that how you said it?
That's exactly what I said.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So, do you know who Andrew Huberman is? He has a podcast called The
Oh,
Huberman
I've
Lab.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
So he's a scientist, teaches at Stanford University. And Andrew Huberman, this is what I heard him say on one of his shows. I don't know him personally, but I do know someone who tagged him and said, Andrew, you need to have Gloria Hester on your show. She's
Mm.
amazing. She works somatically with animals. It'd be an amazing show. And I was like, did you really do that? And she's like, yeah, she screenshotted it. So I'm like, she says that Mr. Huberman should have me on the show. And I agree 1,000%. I think we'd have a blast. I think it would be so much fun. But so I don't know him personally, but I heard him say that he loves yoga nidra. He practices it every day, and it's helped him tremendously. It's been a great boon for him. But they don't call it yoga nidra because he said I think he used the word stigma around yoga. Uh,
Yes.
so they made up an acronym for it. I don't remember that.
Mm.
It's like something like DMSR, but I'm not sure that's what it is. But it's an acronym for a couple of words that they felt
Sure.
good to call it that in science. He said technically it's yoga nidra, but we don't call it that. So you're right. I mean, apparently I'm so glad I dipped my toe in the water and went ahead and I did ask for guidance about who to study with, and I didn't stay glued to one branch of yoga either. And I think that was
Yeah.
excellent. That was a big part. That was also a big part of my developmental path, my learning, and hopefully that's what kept me out of the sketchy part.
Okay, so is there any final message you want to tell anybody who might be listening about your
Uh,
story?
about my story. That's
And then make sure you tell people where to find you.
okay. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for having me. It's been just letting me share from my heart and
Yeah, of course.
yammer around a little bit. Let's see, anything about me that I hope that you'll find in yourself what parts of you are most wanting to come forward. I think that is something. I hope that this conversation will help inspire that.
Nice.
Um, I'm so grateful for people who, did that in the ways they knew how in their era. I definitely do that in my era, to even do it, having these conversations is
Yeah.
part of that. So yes, I hope you'll find that, the part of you that wants to come forward and look for ways to find your own inner guidance. That is so, so important because if something hasn't been done before and it hasn't been seen, it's going to be really hard for someone else to encourage you to do that.
Yes.
So there's having
I've experienced that my entire career. Yes. That 1,000%.
yes, and also having a good people. Let's see. I have some people I refer to as clients, some people I refer to as students, just because we have different kinds of relationships. But this particular person, I shared with her, I encouraged her to not share the dreams that she has deep in her heart with just anyone, because oftentimes they'll say that's ridiculous, or
Yeah.
it's either, who knows why they do it. We just want to avoid that. So because your dream is precious, it's like a newborn baby. You want to hold that, you don't hand it to a stranger. So you treat it like the precious thing that it is. It's your baby. Hold your baby and know who you can say, would you like to hold my baby too? Because I know you're going to be so sweet to this baby, and it's going to
Yeah.
have support and love, and you're going to know how to hold it just right. So if you have people like that you can trust and share with, great. If you don't, just keep it between you and God or source or the universe or the divine, whatever is your support system that you have.
Yeah.
And look for good mentors. I think that's so important. Um, and if some you want it won't always be perfect, but I think intention is a lot. That's probably, I can probably stop there. It's about maybe more than you asked for. Um, and then where you can find me. So my name again is Gloria Hester. I have a website called gloriahester.com. My last name is Hester. And I'm on most all of the socials with that name as well, Gloria Hester. And you're welcome to email me at info@gloriahester.com if you want to do that. And I always laugh and say you can send me smoke signals too if you want to. And and I'm just so grateful for anyone who comes across our conversation, and grateful for you for listening. And I wish you all well, and that you find in Joseph Campbell's words, you find your bliss, and that we all get to help some animals and some people have better lives. Thank you for having me, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Gloria. Some threads that I'm going to be pulling on for myself this week are going to be being curious about how to balance my call to my own intuition with the needs that we all have to say no to things that might not really be serving us. Really, I think there's some nuance to how we discern between our own intuition and social obligation that I know I'm going to be thinking about all week long. Next week, Shelley Ald is back to tell us about her work using yoga for a school district. I find her story incredibly inspiring, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Until then, I am so grateful you're here, my friends. Let's go get to work, and I'll catch you around the water cooler next time.